Welcome back to another video. This demo is going to be on the topic of painting textures. So whether you're going to be painting a fur texture, hair, grass, or anything else similar that has a lot of small parts, and you're wondering how to do that in oil paint, that's what this video will be about, and I'll be doing a master copy. Here is a color chart of the Zorn palette. This is the range of colors that I'll be using for this demo. In particular, Ivory black and Cad red, which is like a warm red. Here you can see I'm showing the color chart and the kind of range of value within that red-black combo in this particular area of the master copy that I'm doing. Here are some small brushes that I have available to use. I ended up not using the ones on the right, those hog hair brushes. I kind of forgot they were there, and I just focused on using the two on the left, which are a synthetic hair Filbert small sizes there. I think those brushes are from Treckle, but any kind of like small size, even if it's a different shape, like a round brush or a flat brush, will work. I just happen to give these ones a try for this demo, and I'm using solvent and linseed oil and my colors on my palette. So basically my plan here, what I'm going to do is I have my colors pre-mixed on my palette. As you can see, I'm dipping into some of those colors. I used the Ivory black and Cad red mixture and added white for the lighter values and used a palette knife to get a range of about 5 values there. So I'm referencing off camera my reference photo of the original painting that I'm doing this master copy from, and I'm trying to match the darkest value because I'm going to start with those darker values first, and then I'll go to the medium, and then I'll go to the light, and I'll explain why in a moment. But you can see here how I'm just doing some little tests. I'm testing out what the color looks like on the canvas and trying to determine if I like the value and temperature match before I use it all over. So now you can see, obviously you can see I have already done this like first layer of just blocking in the large shapes, and now I'm starting in with approaching the texture. And I'm laying in this layer of paint of the darkest values of this particular area of the textured fabric. It's sort of like a fur fabric, I guess, that I'm painting here. But yeah, I'm just focusing on the darkest sections first, because the way I'm going to show the texture is basically the dark layers of the fur are underneath, and then as you get towards the surface, or the parts of the fur that are catching the most light, those will be lighter. So it's kind of easiest to achieve this by doing the dark parts first, and then when you do the medium, that will overlap a little bit of the dark parts, and then when you do the light as the final part, those will overlap some in the medium. So you're kind of like achieving this textured look in a way of like thinking how the light is working, the light and shadow, right? The light is going to hit the topmost part of the fur. So yeah, here you can see I'm even in layers, even in areas that I already have some paint, it's only a first layer. So this second layer is really solidifying the opacity and kind of, making little adjustments with the value and temperature to get a really good match to my reference. And you could just see how much richer the color looks on this second layer. And I'm also considering the direction that the fur is going. So usually fur and hair will kind of flow in certain directions. And if you can kind of use your brush strokes going in that same direction, think of it kind of like as a pattern, right? Once you sort of understand what the pattern's doing, how it works, what direction the pattern's moving in, you can kind of replicate it by just kind of doing this repetitive motion, right? So I'm using that approach, because it's a short fur fabric, I'm using kind of smaller brush strokes. If I was doing something like a longer hair, that kind of like long hair texture, or maybe even like, I don't know, really tall grass, maybe I'd use longer paint strokes. But because this is a short fur, it'd be the same with a short grass, short hair, maybe a small short basket weave, or all these kinds of textures. You can kind of utilize this sort of smaller, shorter brush strokes to sort of achieve that look. So as you can see, I've kind of moved on to more of a medium value here, because I've established kind of those darkest darks, and now I'm allowing some of that medium color to overlap a little bit. So it's okay as you go if some of these like dark, medium, and light kind of blend in a little bit together. That just kind of helps it feel more cohesive. You just don't want to overwork an area too much to the point where everything starts to look blurry and you lose those small little brush strokes. So it does take some practice and some brush control and some trial and error if you're new to this kind of technique. But here you could see now I'm like going with a little bit of a lighter value. I'm still going in that same direction that the fur is flowing, and I'm just kind of using those predictable small brush strokes. And I'm looking back and forth between my painting and my reference, so that I can kind of stay on track with what I'm doing. Oftentimes when we're painting, we kind of have this idea in our mind of like what it should look like, and forget if we're doing a master copy, it's easy to forget to kind of paint what we see rather than paint what we think we know, right? So trust the reference, as you go. And it's okay to go back to some of those darker values if you kind of lose them after doing the light ones. Sometimes I'll go back and kind of do a few more dark ones to kind of reinforce it. And then, if that gets too much, then I can always go back to the light ones. So, it's not a perfect formula, this idea of starting with dark and then going to the medium and then going to the light. You may have to go back and do little touch-ups and adjustments. That's just, the imperfect nature of painting is that you kind of have to trial and error as you go. But you can kind of see how it's developing. It's already starting to kind of have that illusion of a short fur texture. It looks soft, it looks organic. It definitely looks different than, for example, the shirt that he's wearing, which is more kind of like just smooth without a texture. This one you can start to see it's starting to look like it has a texture. And I can't remember in this demo if I switched to a smaller brush or not, but after I kind of worked for a while, I was thinking, I probably could have gone even smaller in size with the brush. But even with the size that I was using, I still got the illusion of texture. So even if it wasn't a perfect match to the original in terms of like how small the little tufts of fur were, it still had that same illusion of a fur texture. So, that's the main thing. You want it to look convincing. You want it to look like it's that kind of soft texture. So as you can see, now that I'm kind of like fine tuning, I'm sort of slowing down just a little bit. I think I was trying to kind of warm up the temperature in the lighter areas, and the darkest areas had a bit of a cooler temperature. So for the cooler temperature, I added more black. For the warmer temperature, I added more red. Basically with the Zorn palette, the Ivory Black works as your blue. So it's kind of like using primaries like blue, red, yellow, but except that your blue is basically a very desaturated blue because it's an Ivory Black. If you're not familiar with the Zorn palette, it's super interesting. It's super helpful for some of these types of like old European master copy or portrait type paintings where you just need a lot of like neutrals, warm toned, portrait situations. This palette can be very helpful. And it also makes very beautiful, deep, purpley neutrals, which you can kind of see here. The shadow areas of the fur drapery has, it kind of leans towards that like dark neutral purple. As you can see, I'm going back into those dark areas and kind of adjusting the shapes a little bit. If you see something to correct it. I'm always looking for shapes. So I'm looking for like groupings of the fur. Like fur isn't just like a completely even layer of little marks, right? Like there's hair kind of tends to group together, or fur and hair and different types of things like that will group together. So you can kind of look for those little groups of shadow and light, and kind of accentuate that to give it some realistic shape and three-dimensionality. And I'm mostly using both the solvent and linseed as I paint. So the solvent, I mostly just used it at the beginning to kind of wet my brush and kind of do an equal part of solvent and linseed when I first started. But I'm mostly using linseed to improve the flow of the paint because I don't want to thin it down too much with the solvent. I just want the linseed to help it to flow a little bit. Here I'm doing some really light highlights where the light is touching the topmost part of some little tufts of fur. And what's going to happen is your color will kind of blend into the wet paint that's already there. So you might have to go a little bit lighter than what you think you need, just, anticipating the fact that once you start doing a couple of brush strokes, it's just going to mix in with what's already there. So you'll see me go back and forth to the palette and the canvas quite a bit because I'm, kind of wiping my brush off with the rag to kind of get the darker color off, and then going back into my lighter color again to keep pushing those lighter values on those highlight areas, knowing that basically I can only do like a couple of brush strokes at a time before the color on my brush goes darker because it's mixing in with that darker color. And notice how the light parts are kind of overlapping that dark area in the middle. So you can kind of see how it works this way, to kind of start with a dark, then go medium, and then go with a light. So the light can overlap. And I would pretty much use this exact same strategy when I move on to paint the cat, which is not in this demo, but eventually if I go in and work on the fur of the cat, I would use this same same approach. I think when you're doing like areas of texture like this in a painting, it's, you know, it's helpful to kind of do it all in one go for that area. Like, aside from the fact that I did that initial block in with the first layer of paint and then let it dry. So I'm working on that like block in, that dry block in, but doing the dark and medium and light texture, it helps to kind of do it all in one go while the paint is wet. So the, you know, because you do want the paint to mix a little bit together to make it feel soft and natural. You just got to find the balance between like showing those brush strokes and showing the light without it getting like too blurred. And here I'm showing kind of like how I'm dipping into my, this is when I was working on the light, the lightest parts, and you know how I'm on the left that, you know, that there's some like linseed oil there on the palette. So if I need to improve the flow of the paint, I'll dip in there, and then I dip into my color and I kind of rotate the brush a little bit to like get it coated all the way over and get my brush really nice and pointy. And then I go in and do a few strokes, and I come back to the color and do that again. And if I was more diligent, I would be more diligent about going, you know, cleaning my brush off on the rag before I dip into my color, but I was getting lazy. And then, you know, anyway, here's a little close up. You can kind of see how it's looking. So it's definitely looking like fur. And that's pretty much it for this section of texture on this master copy. I hope this gave you some ideas of how to approach texture in your paintings. If you've got any thoughts, please leave them in the comments below.